So in the ancient Caucasus, which is to say ancient northwestern Iran, there was this folklore and mythology of an entity called Satana. This is very old. Like we have this attested from, 800 BC or something like that. And it turned into basically the legend of King Arthur and the Lady of the Lake. So Satana becomes the Lady of the Lake. And instead of it being the Caspian Sea that she's under, it's, the lake. It goes back to this Gorgonic mysticism of northern Iran. Gorgonic. And Satana herself was the mother of all the Gorgons. So this original female Satan of the Caucasus was also associated with the serpent, which of course becomes, the key symbolic association of Satan in the Bible, the serpent or the dragon. It's a kind of psychosocial engineering that's taking place. This trickster entity has as its motivation catalyzing the continued and further evolution of humanity toward a kind of superhuman or post-human condition. I mean, look, the devil's in the details, literally. So, you'd have to read the book. But I try to make the case that this entity appears to have a very personal interest in it. In other words, whatever this consciousness is that's engaging us through the close encounter phenomenon, it does not appear to be radically alien in a way where we're not mutually intelligible forms of life. And if that were the case, it wouldn't be as intensely engaged with our history as it is, right? This entity seems to be continually involved in shaping and reshaping human history and offering basically provocations and catalysts for us to take evolutionary leaps and also to test the strength of various societies, right? And exercise some degree of evolutionary selection over what forms of life move forward into the future. I argue in Satanian, as I have in my book Prometheism, that there's a lot of evidence we're living in a computational cosmos, in a quantum computational information processing system. And that this trickster entity is actually the programmer or the matron of the matrix, right? The mother of the matrix that we're ensconced in. And that she has a very personal interest in fostering the evolution of individuals and societies that have a creative capacity that would be useful in negating entropy to the greatest extent possible. So that this entity's primary concern is essentially the death of the universe. This entity is actually engaged in a combat against death in the most profound and far-reaching sense. In other words, the heat death of the universe, entropy, cosmic entropy. And what her motivation is to cultivate negentropic creative potential in any and every pocket where she can find it, as a kind of motor of evolution. And that selection principle for evolution for her ultimately is to see what kinds of societies and individuals are most capable of resisting entropy by increasing complexity and dynamism on a cultural and psychological.
So,
Yes.
you were bringing up, said something interesting here now. You said the computer simulation theory. And we're talking about something where, you bring up the Matrix, you bring up all these. This is a set of archetypal ideas that leads towards Gnosticism, which you brought up Buddhist nihilism earlier, for example. I made a post on Twitter recently, steelmanning Schopenhauer. And what is Schopenhauer? Only the fundamental pessimist, saying that, yes, this is a simulation, but it's not a good simulation. You fundamentally must assume that this is evil. It's like the world that we're in is the Matrix, which is the mother, which is evil. It's like the reason
That's
why...
Schopenhauer's perspective.
Yes. And it's a prison. It causes immense suffering. And we're also then dealing with the same phenomenon where we're talking about UFOs. I'm not sure if obviously you fully agree with this thesis, but like they're coming from the fifth dimension. They represent an outside set of forces that are coming in here and interacting with us, which I assume all entities would be in some sense. That's in a weird way affirming a lot of the Gnostic thesis, saying that this is a simulation. If it's a simulation, you have to assume that if there's evil in it, it's there for a reason, which is kind of crooked. It's like, are we trapped inside something computer simulation? As these creators put evil in it? And it's like, why would they do that? That's psychotic. People like Buddha sort of saying that they want to escape from it. It starts to sound like pretty kind of like, yeah, you're probably going on the right track there. People like NuYuh sort of saying, no, we must get rid of that otherworldliness and focus on this world, actually starts to look stupid, as if he just made a mistake and he tried to cast all that away, and then quantum physics comes along and proves the other world, and then NuYuh's just a dummy, he was trying to be a trickster too much. How do you kind of slosh all these ideas together? Because it seems like you're like a Nietzschean trying to life affirm the simulation at the same time acknowledging it's a simulation, which seems like a very strong paradox when it's fundamentally down there. And I'm wondering, do you think about it this way? Maybe I'm framing it wrong. What's your thoughts?
I would say your framing is backwards, in the sense that the Gnostics were relatively unsophisticated, ancient people who were trying to understand the fact that we live in a simulation. And the way in which they went terribly wrong was in terms of their various forms of dualism. First of all, their metaphysical dualism. The Gnostics believed that we're living inside of a material prison, and that the simulacrum is of a fallen nature compared to some pleroma, some transcendental realm outside of this construct, and that the demiurge who created this construct is an evil being. So first of all, you have a metaphysical dualism between a fallen material world and then some transcendental realm, which is one kind of dualism that Nietzsche is already trying to deconstruct and implode, right? And I similarly, throughout my works with my notion of the spectral, I'm also trying to deconstruct this kind of ontological dualism. But then in the notion of the evil demiurge, the fact that the demiurge is evil, you have a moral dualism as well, where the Gnostics, they value, their moral valuation of this world is that it's evil and that its creator is evil, and that to be good is to try to transcend this world and basically leave one's physicality and corporality behind and ascend to the pleroma and become these basically immaterial, perfect beings of light. I mean, there's 20 different attested forms of Gnosticism running from antiquity into the Middle Ages, but these are basic themes that you find in a lot of them. And I'm trying to deconstruct both the ontological dualism and also the moral dualism, really in a furthering of Nietzsche's project. So I would say that, it's mistaken to see the thesis of us living in a quantum computational cosmos as Gnostic. Mm-hmm. It's the Gnostics who mistook what it means to understand that we're living in a construct. And in terms of the question of evil, right? I mean, Schopenhauer was a profoundly unpleasant, misogynistic person who, I think should hardly be the standard of our valuation of the world and of our fellow human beings. In terms of the question of evil, it's ridiculously simplistic to want to live in a world without harsh catalysts in it. I mean, that which doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Harsh experiences, shocks, trauma are all the catalysts and instigations of psychological growth, and also growth for societies. I mean, you see this both as in Europe, as Nietzsche observes, with the deepening of the complexity of the European soul as a result of the trauma that was Christianity and the Inquisition and so on and so forth. So you can evaluate the Christian dominance over Europe and the Inquisition as something horrible, as I do in all my writings. At the same time, you can recognize that the complexity of modern European civilization and the depth of the European soul as it exists today is something far more profound than what existed in pagan antiquity before Christianity, right? So I'm not advocating some kind of neo-paganism. I'm advocating a post-Christian worldview, right? Which is what makes it satanic, in a sense. I mean, this is the classic argument between pagans and Satanists, where the pagans look at the Satanists and say, you all are not pagans because you're presupposing Christianity. And you could say the same thing in an Islamic context. I mean, I wrote a 400, 500-page history of Iran, right? And one of my arguments, so point being, you can have a really terrible evaluation of Islam, as I do. I mean, I think it's one of the most horrible ideologies that has ever appeared on the face of the earth. At the same time, it catalyzed a profound transformation of Persian culture. And on the other side of this inoculant, an immune strength was developed in that society, which made it much stronger than what it had been before. So the Gnostics are very naive in not wanting there to be these kinds of evils in the world. These kinds of evils breed strength and increase complexity and foster dynamism.
Oh yeah, good answer actually. So it's like taking the view, essentially, is this pro-demiurge? Taking the view that there is a creator making a simulation, and he's made a video game, but he's put inside of it like bad things. He's put
she.
Inside of
in my case, I'd say she.
A female coder, the demiurge, we'll call her, codename demiurge.
Or in Judaism, it's like the left hand versus right hand of God, where the left hand is the punishing one, and it creates a kind of evolutionary pressure over time.
Well, the phrase that I've repeated several times in I think at this point, 3 or 4 of my books even, is that God is an invention of the devil. And what I mean by that is that you have to read the book of Job backwards. The moral of the story is, jackass, why are you bending over like this? Where is your spine? Who would worship a God like me?
Did you ever read Jung's Answer to Job?
I think it's too weak.
Yeah, I was assuming you were going to say that, but he basically comes to the thesis that God sadistically abuses him and then feels guilt and offers Christ as like an apology. Go kill me as a sorry. You torture me now as a sorry for this. And so you're just basically saying that it was more of an exposition, and Job just took it, and it's like you're like a farm animal.
Yes, and that's ultimately how I read the Bible. The biblical religion was created to act as a catalyst for rebellion and individuation.
Have you... I apologize. I'm stealing all the questions now. Have you read Ion by Jung?
Yeah, I've read it years ago.
Well, there's a spin, I think, on what you're saying there that's quite interesting, because he talks about the oscillation between the Christian age and the anti-Christian age. And the whole narrative throughout it is the concept of the development of the conscience, which is like where we get guilt from, where we ultimately get morality from. And I think there's some very, very profound arguments in that, because if you look around at our world right now, it doesn't actually matter where most people fall. Everybody has a moral thesis. This is like Nietzschean relativistic morality. People think, oh, that means there's no such thing as good and evil. It actually means everybody projects a good and evil, but it's very hard to decide what's a correct one. So there's this obsession with morality and the conscience and guilt that is inside people's heads. And so as we've been evolving, it seems like we're now going into this technological age where we're essentially creating God, which is the Antichrist. Oh, and these were symbols even that started to show up in alchemy. The alchemists were searching for the philosopher's stone. What has technology manifest for itself? We've got these stones that live. And the ultimate goal of all this stuff is to build AI, which is a living stone, a silicon stone that lives.
A Stanley Kubrick monolith over here.
Yeah, exactly. And we're sort of accelerating towards that point where we're like kind of giving birth to this thing. And in a weird way, if we don't have the mental strength, the mental dynamism to, I guess you could say, become conscious of the moral question, we're basically going to hand over all of our authority to AI, and it's just going to enslave us. It's going to be like the total punishment for being compliant religious herd people who just go slave moralists and just bow down to what you're told by the church is, in a weird way, an early version of a cybernetic system that sucks everybody into it and creates a hierarchy command like a nervous system. And then now this is evolving into the technology, because all of this stuff we're connected to a cybernetic system, and then the end goal is AI, where you're all like you're trapped, and inside of it is the God voice, that type of thing.
Just several things about Jung's ion or aeon, right? I mean, this is a Greek word that can be pronounced ion or aeon, and it's, if you notice in my book title, Sataneon, right? The aeon of Satana, Sataneon.
Okay.
One thing is, in the chapter on Christ in that book, in Jung's Ion or Aeon, he portrays Christ as the perfectly pure being, and you see this kind of biblical ignorance also in an intellect no less than Rudolf Steiner's. And these are a case of two really brilliant men, Jung and Steiner, both super geniuses, who can't sit down and read the goddamn Bible without projecting 10 different accounts of UFOs in the book of Ezekiel. It's very clear. It's very clear that the entities inside what we would call UFOs are giving Ezekiel and these Kohanim instructions to go murder people who've deviated from the Jewish law.
And these aren't the trickster aliens. These are the...
Well, here's where I'm going with this. That's the point I want to make with this, is that I think that the trickster intelligence is trying to see what forms of oppressive social organization and what retarded ideologies masses of humans are willing to accept and organize themselves according to. Because those people don't deserve to survive. This entity is running an evolutionary machine. And her purpose is to find a form of life that can help her to indefinitely resist entropy on a cosmic scale. And she has no business with people who are going to swallow the biblical religion, or for that matter, Islam, right? The Quranic message. And so these are ways to test the resilience of a society and its capacity to produce strong individuals and creative minds. That's what I mean when I say God is an invention of the devil, and why. So my first response about the book of about Ion is that he's completely misconstruing Christ, and he's doing it through Gnostic projections onto the Bible. And the other point I wanted to make is that where that leads him is to this quasi-Luddite view of technology, where the AI that we're developing now is necessarily an expression of an evil antichrist, right? It's, again, another form of Gnostic dualism, the natural versus the artificial. Whereas, actually, we're living in a cosmos managed by an artificial intelligence. And as I've argued before, the alignment problem, the so-called alignment problem that engineers at OpenAI and Google are working on, in other words, the supposed challenge of aligning AI with human values, is completely misconstrued. First of all, there are no human values. We have, 5, 6 different major civilizations in the world. They all have conflicting value systems. The real alignment problem is the alignment of our AI with the existing AI managing this cosmos. Because if you think that the AI managing this cosmos is going to allow us to develop an AI that's not aligned with her, forget about it. Okay? So that's the real existential risk, is that we need to understand the motivation and the aim and goal of the entity that's actually managing and fostering evolution inside this computational cosmos.